the world was about to descend into darkness. It was a time of great tension and fear, as the major powers of the world jostled for position, each seeking to expand their influence and control over the globe. Nationalism was on the rise, fueled by a sense of pride and competition that bordered on fanaticism. Imperialism was rampant, with powerful nations seeking to extend their reach across the seas and into far-flung territories. And then, as if out of nowhere, war erupted. It was a conflict unlike any other, a battle that would leave the world forever changed. This is the terrifying story of the First World War, a time of unimaginable horror and suffering, and one that would come to be known as the war to end all wars. Welcome to Cognopolis, where curious people from all around the world come to get inspired. Today, we're going to take a deep dive into one of the most significant events in human history, the First World War. From the complex and multifaceted causes that led to the war's outbreak, to the bloody battles and devastating aftermath, this is a story that will leave you both horrified and in awe of the resilience of the human spirit. So buckle up and get ready to explore the depths of one of the darkest chapters of our history, and come out on the other side with a deeper understanding of the world we live in today. Before we dive in, make sure to subscribe to the channel. It costs nothing and helps the channel grow. The underlying causes of World War I were complex and multifaceted. They included long-term factors such as nationalism, militarism, imperialism, and alliances, as well as short-term triggers such as the assassination of Archduke Franz Ferdinand of Austria-Hungary. Nationalism is a belief and sentiment that people have towards their own country, often resulting in a strong sense of loyalty and pride towards their nation. In the early 20th century, nationalism was a powerful force in Europe, with many people feeling a strong attachment to their country and a desire to protect its interests. This was especially true for countries that had recently gained independence or were trying to establish themselves as major players in the international community. However, this strong attachment to one's own country also led to competition between nations for territory and resources, as well as a sense of superiority over other nations. Countries felt the need to expand their territories, acquire more resources, and strengthen their military power in order to protect their interests and assert their dominance. This competition, in turn, led to tension and conflict between countries that were trying to outdo each other. One example of this was the arms race between Germany and Britain, which started in the early 20th century. Germany was rapidly building up its military, which made Britain feel threatened and led to a buildup of their own military forces. This competition led to a sense of mistrust and suspicion between the two countries, contributing to the tensions that eventually led to the outbreak of World War I. Nationalism also contributed to the Balkan crisis, which was one of the major triggers of the war. The Balkan region was made up of several different ethnic groups, each with their own aspirations for independence and self-determination. This led to a complex web of alliances and rivalries, with each country vying for dominance and trying to protect its own interests. The assassination of Archduke Franz Ferdinand of Austria-Hungary in Sarajevo, Bosnia, by a Serbian nationalist set off a chain of events that eventually led to the outbreak of war. Militarism is a political and social ideology that places a strong emphasis on the importance of a powerful military in protecting and advancing a nation's interests. In the early 20th century, militarism was a significant force in many European countries, especially Germany, where it was closely tied to the concept of national glory and the pursuit of imperial expansion. Militarism played a major role in the outbreak of World War I in several ways. Firstly, it led to the development of massive armies and navies that were seen as essential for national defense and expansion. Germany, in particular, invested heavily in its military, building up a powerful army and navy that it hoped would allow it to compete with other European powers like France and Britain. This arms race led to a sense of competition and tension between countries, as each tried to outdo the others in terms of military power. For example, the British feared the rise of the German Navy and responded by building their own massive fleet, while France invested heavily in its own military in response to the German threat. The focus on military strength also led to a sense of aggressive nationalism, with countries increasingly willing to use military force to assert their dominance and pursue their interests. This contributed to the tension and mistrust between nations, making it more difficult to resolve disputes through diplomatic means. Militarism also influenced the strategies and tactics used in the war. In particular, it led to a reliance on offensive tactics that involved massive troop movements and frontal assaults on enemy positions. These tactics proved to be extremely costly in terms of casualties, contributing to the enormous loss of life on both sides of the conflict. Furthermore, militarism helped to perpetuate the war by creating an environment where military leaders and politicians were reluctant to seek peace or negotiate settlements. Instead, they were often driven by a desire to achieve victory on the battlefield and were willing to continue the war even in the face of mounting losses and widespread suffering. Imperialism is a political and economic system in which a powerful country extends its influence and control over other territories or countries. In the late 19th and early 20th centuries, many European countries were engaged in imperialism, with powerful nations like Britain, France, and Germany trying to acquire colonies and territories around the world. During the age of imperialism, European powers engaged in colonialism, which involved the establishment of colonies in other regions of the world for economic, political, and strategic purposes. Countries like Britain, France, and Spain established large empires through colonization, with colonies in Africa, Asia, and the Americas. This led to significant exploitation of colonized regions, including the exploitation of natural resources, forced labor, and cultural suppression. The impact of imperialism was profound, with many regions experiencing significant social, economic, and political changes. Imperialism played a significant role in the lead-up to World War I, contributing to the competition and tension between nations that eventually led to the outbreak of war. Countries were competing for colonies and territories, leading to tension and competition between nations. This competition also contributed to the alliances and rivalries that developed in the years leading up to the war. Alliances are agreements between countries to support each other in times of war or conflict. In the years leading up to World War I, several alliances formed between European countries, contributing to the buildup of tension and the eventual outbreak of war. In 1882, Germany, Austria-Hungary, and Italy formed the Triple Alliance, a military alliance designed to protect their interests and balance the power of other European countries. In response, France formed its own alliance with Russia in 1894, which became known as the Franco-Russian Alliance. Britain, which had previously remained largely neutral, became concerned about the growing power of Germany and formed an alliance with France and Russia in 1907, known as the Triple Entente. These alliances contributed to the arms race and the competition between European nations, with each country trying to build up its military power in order to protect its interests and those of its allies. The alliances also made it more difficult to resolve conflicts through diplomatic means, as countries were often bound by their agreements to support their allies in times of war. The system of alliances came into play when Archduke Franz Ferdinand of Austria-Hungary was assassinated in 1914 by a Serbian nationalist. Austria-Hungary, supported by Germany, declared war on Serbia, drawing in Russia, France, and eventually Britain and other countries in a wider conflict that became known as World War I. The alliances contributed to the scale and devastation of the war, as countries were drawn into the conflict by their agreements to support their allies. The system of alliances also helped to perpetuate the war, as countries were reluctant to seek peace or negotiate settlements that might go against the interests of their allies. In June 1914, Archduke Franz Ferdinand of Austria-Hungary was on a visit to the Bosnian capital of Sarajevo when he was assassinated by a young Serbian nationalist named Gavrilo Princip. The assassination was part of a larger movement to unite all of the Slavic people in the Balkans, many of whom lived under the rule of the Austro-Hungarian Empire. The assassination was a huge shock to Austria-Hungary, and the government quickly blamed Serbia for the attack. Austria-Hungary issued an ultimatum to Serbia, demanding that they take action against the nationalist groups responsible for the assassination. When Serbia refused to comply with all of Austria-Hungary's demands, Austria-Hungary declared war on Serbia. This event triggered a chain reaction of alliances and conflicts that ultimately led to the outbreak of war. Russia, which had close ties to Serbia, mobilized its troops in support of Serbia. Germany, which was allied with Austria-Hungary, declared war on Russia and France. Britain, which had alliances with both France and Russia, declared war on Germany. The assassination of Archduke Franz Ferdinand was just one event in a long history of tension and competition between European countries. However, it was a major catalyst that led to the outbreak of World War I. The conflict would eventually claim millions of lives and have a profound impact on the world. After the assassination of Archduke Franz Ferdinand, tensions between different countries grew very high. Austria-Hungary blamed Serbia for the assassination and declared war on them. This caused other countries to get involved because of alliances they had with Austria-Hungary or Serbia. Germany, which was a strong ally of Austria-Hungary, declared war on Russia and France. Britain, in turn, declared war on Germany because they had a treaty with France and were concerned about the situation. With these declarations of war, the conflict spread quickly, and many more countries got involved. It became a big war involving nations from all over the world. This marked the start of World War I, which lasted for several years and had a huge impact on people's lives. The outbreak of war was a result of a series of events and tensions that had been building up for a long time. The assassination of Archduke Franz Ferdinand was the spark that set everything off, leading to a chain reaction of declarations of war and the beginning of a devastating conflict. During World War I, soldiers fought in a type of warfare called trench warfare. Trenches were long ditches that were dug into the ground for protection. They stretched for miles and were filled with soldiers from both sides. Soldiers spent a lot of time in the trenches, sometimes for weeks or even months. Life in the trenches was very difficult and dangerous. The conditions were muddy, dirty, and often filled with rats and insects. Soldiers faced constant threats from enemy gunfire and artillery shells. The trenches were divided into different sections, including the frontline trenches, support trenches, and communication trenches. Soldiers would rotate between these sections to rest, eat, or carry out their duties. Both sides would try to gain an advantage by launching attacks on the enemy's trenches. This often involved going over the top, which meant climbing out of the trenches and crossing no man's land, a dangerous open area between the opposing trenches. These attacks were extremely risky and resulted in heavy casualties. Trench warfare was characterized by long periods of stalemate, where neither side could make significant progress. The fronts remained relatively stable, with small gains and losses. New weapons like machine guns, artillery, and poison gas made it difficult to advance without suffering heavy losses. Life in the trenches was very challenging for the soldiers. They faced constant fear, illness, and the harsh conditions of living in close quarters with limited supplies. The war became a stalemate, with neither side able to gain a decisive victory for a long time. Trench warfare was a defining feature of World War I and had a significant impact on the soldiers' experiences and the overall course of the war. During World War I, there was a major military campaign called the Gallipoli Campaign. It took place on the Gallipoli Peninsula in present-day Turkey. The campaign was fought between the Allied forces, which included soldiers from countries like Britain, France, Australia, and New Zealand, and the Ottoman Empire, modern-day Turkey. The goal of the campaign was for the Allies to capture the Gallipoli Peninsula and open up a new front against the Ottoman Empire. They hoped to take control of the Dardanelles, a strategic waterway that connected the Mediterranean Sea to the Black Sea. The campaign began in April 1915 when Allied forces landed on the beaches of Gallipoli. However, they faced strong resistance from the Ottoman defenders. The terrain was difficult, with steep cliffs and heavily fortified positions, making progress slow and challenging. Both sides suffered heavy casualties during the campaign. The fighting lasted for several months, with soldiers enduring harsh conditions, including extreme heat, lack of supplies, and constant enemy fire. Despite their efforts, the Allies were unable to make significant gains. In December 1915, the Allied forces decided to evacuate the peninsula. They withdrew their troops under the cover of darkness and without the knowledge of the Ottoman forces. The Gallipoli campaign ended as a military failure for the Allies, with many lives lost on both sides. The Gallipoli campaign is remembered for the bravery and resilience of the soldiers involved, particularly the Anzac, Australian and New Zealand Army Corps troops who fought there. It has become an important part of the national identity and remembrance in Australia and New Zealand. The Gallipoli campaign showed the challenges and difficulties of warfare in challenging terrain and fortified positions. It highlighted the importance of proper planning, coordination, and understanding the enemy's strengths in military operations. The Battle of the Somme was a major battle fought during World War I. It took place between July and November 1916 in the region of the River Somme in France. The battle was fought between the Allied forces, mainly consisting of soldiers from Britain and France, and the German army. The goal of the battle was for the Allies to break through the German lines and gain control of the area. The battle began with a massive artillery bombardment by the Allies, intended to weaken the German defenses. Following the bombardment, Allied soldiers went over the top and advanced towards the enemy trenches. However, the German defenses were stronger than expected. They had well-fortified positions and machine guns that inflicted heavy casualties on the advancing Allied troops. The soldiers faced difficult conditions, including barbed wire, mud, and artillery fire. The Battle of the Somme was characterized by fierce fighting and significant casualties on both sides. On the first day alone, the British suffered more than 57,000 casualties, including over 19,000 soldiers killed. The battle continued for several months, with little significant progress made by either side. The battle finally ended in November 1916, with the Allies gaining a small amount of territory but failing to achieve their overall objectives. The Battle of the Somme resulted in massive loss of life, with an estimated total of over 1 million soldiers killed or wounded on both sides. The Battle of the Somme had a profound impact on the soldiers in the war. It highlighted the difficulties of trench warfare, the strength of the German defenses, and the high cost of offensive operations. It is remembered as one of the bloodiest and most brutal battles of World War I. The Russian Revolution was a major event that took place in Russia during World War I. It happened in 1917 and led to big changes in the country. At that time, Russia was ruled by a king called the Tsar, who had a lot of power. However, the people of Russia were unhappy with the way the country was being run. They were facing many problems like food shortages, high prices, and the heavy losses in the war. In February 1917, protests and demonstrations broke out in the capital city of St. Petersburg. The people demanded better living conditions and an end to the war. These protests grew bigger and eventually forced the Tsar to step down from power. After the Tsar's abdication, a new government was established called the Provisional Government. However, the Provisional Government faced many challenges and did not address the people's concerns effectively. In October 1917, a group called the Bolsheviks, led by Vladimir Lenin, took control of the government in what is known as the October Revolution. The Bolsheviks wanted to create a new kind of government based on communism, where everyone would be equal and resources would be shared. The Russian Revolution had a big impact on World War I. The new communist government, known as the Soviet Union, wanted to end Russia's involvement in the war. In March 1918, they signed the Treaty of Brest-Litovsk with Germany, which ended Russia's participation in the war and gave up a lot of territory. The Russian Revolution also had broader effects on the war. The withdrawal of Russia from the war allowed Germany to focus more of its forces on the Western Front, where they launched major offensives in 1918. The revolution also inspired other countries and revolutionary movements around the world. The entry of the United States into World War I was an important event that happened in 1917. At the beginning of the war, the United States remained neutral and did not get involved. However, there were several factors that eventually led to the U.S. joining the war. One of the main reasons was the unrestricted submarine warfare conducted by Germany. German submarines, called U-boats, were sinking ships that carried people and supplies from neutral countries, including the United States. This caused the US to lose ships and American lives, which created anger and pressure to take action. Another factor was the Zimmermann telegram. This was a secret message sent by Germany to Mexico, proposing a military alliance against the United States. When the contents of the telegram were intercepted and made public, it angered the American people and influenced their opinion towards joining the war. On April 6, 1917, the United States officially declared war on Germany and entered World War I. The US government believed that by joining the war, they could help bring about a faster victory for the Allies, the countries fighting against Germany and its allies. The entry of the United States brought significant resources and manpower to the Allied cause. American soldiers, known as doughboys, were sent to fight on the Western Front in Europe. The United States also provided financial and industrial support, supplying weapons, equipment, and supplies to the Allies. The U.S. entry into the war had a significant impact on the balance of power. The fresh troops and resources provided by the United States boosted the morale and strength of the Allied forces. Eventually, with the combined efforts of the Allied countries, Germany and its allies were pushed back and defeated. The Treaty of Versailles was an important agreement that was signed at the end of World War I in 1919. It was meant to decide the terms and conditions for peace between the countries involved in the war, particularly Germany. The treaty was negotiated by the leaders of the Allied powers, including Britain, France, and the United States. They wanted to make sure that Germany would not be able to start another war in the future. The treaty had several important provisions. Firstly, Germany was blamed for starting the war and was made to accept full responsibility. They were also required to pay large sums of money, called reparations, to the Allied countries as compensation for the damages caused by the war. Additionally, Germany lost significant amounts of territory as a result of the treaty. This included the loss of important industrial regions and colonies. The German military was also significantly reduced in size, and they were forbidden from having certain types of weapons and military equipment. The Treaty of Versailles was met with a lot of anger and frustration in Germany. Many Germans felt that the terms of the treaty were too harsh and unfair. This led to a sense of resentment and humiliation, which contributed to political instability and created a fertile ground for the rise of extremist ideologies like Nazism in Germany. The treaty had long-lasting effects on the world. It laid the foundation for future conflicts, particularly World War II, as it created a sense of injustice and desire for revenge in Germany. It also led to changes in the map of Europe and the redrawing of national borders, which had significant geopolitical consequences. The League of Nations was an international organization that was created after World War I to promote peace and prevent future wars. It was established as part of the Treaty of Versailles in 1919. The main goal of the League of Nations was to provide a platform for countries to discuss their problems and resolve conflicts through peaceful means, such as negotiations and diplomacy, rather than resorting to war. Member countries of the League of Nations would come together in an assembly to discuss and address issues that could potentially lead to conflicts. They would try to find peaceful solutions and encourage countries to respect each other's sovereignty and territorial integrity. The League also had a council, made up of major powers and rotating members, that had more authority and could take action on behalf of the League. For example, they could impose economic sanctions or even authorize military action to maintain peace and security. However, the League of Nations faced some challenges. Some powerful countries, like the United States, did not join the League, which limited its effectiveness. Additionally, the League had limited means of enforcement and relied heavily on cooperation and voluntary compliance from member nations. Despite its limitations, the League of Nations did achieve some successes. It helped resolve some minor conflicts, promoted disarmament efforts, and tackled issues such as slavery, diseases, and refugees. However, the League of Nations ultimately faced significant challenges in maintaining global peace, especially with the rise of aggressive powers like Nazi Germany and militarist Japan. It eventually dissolved and was replaced by the United Nations after World War II. World War I resulted in a staggering loss of life. It is estimated that the total number of military and civilian deaths during the war was around 16 million people. This includes approximately 9 million military personnel and around 7 million civilians. And there you have it, folks. The story of World War I, a conflict that shook the world to its core. From the assassination that ignited the flame of war, to the trenches where soldiers faced unimaginable hardships, to the monumental shifts in global power and the devastating loss of millions of lives, World War I has left an indelible mark on history. Let us remember the bravery and sacrifice of those who fought and the resilience of those affected by the war. It serves as a powerful reminder of the importance of diplomacy, cooperation, and striving for peace. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit that notification bell to stay tuned for more thrilling stories from the past. Until next time, stay curious, stay informed, and keep exploring.